Rob Jennings Teats. I grew up in a family in a place called Richland, Washington, and my father was a scientist, and he was part of the Manhattan Project, where they developed the first atomic bomb. And the first bomb that was ever exploded was produced in my hometown. And my father was a progressive person, and like many scientists, he never wanted to see the bomb used in any way against people, and he'd hoped for more peaceful uses of nuclear energy, which he worked on mostly for the rest of his life. And he foresaw, even in the early 1960s, that because of our use of carbon dioxide and fossil fuels, that we would be heating up the planet. And he would discuss this with me, and he would say how in the future it was going to be maybe even irreversible if we didn't do something now. So he wanted to develop nuclear energy that was not producing any CO2. So that was my father. My mother was a music teacher. And so I learned a lot about, I suppose, the artistic, aesthetic side of life through her. And she was also quite involved in social causes. And so that was impressive to me. They both were, their faith was important to them. So I realized there must be something about it. And of course, I attended church as a small kid and was active and involved in all the children and youth programs through my church. And as it was in the 1960s, there were many social movements that were underway, and those also had a very strong influence on me. And I think, as I grew into a teenager, was more suspicious of the organizational form of religion. And at the same time, I could see that there was something of value to it. And fortunately, I had the influence of others, pastors, youth ministers, who exposed me to more progressive and even radical Christianity. And that helped me to understand that we were all part of a globe, that we're all part of a human family, that Christianity wasn't the only way to have an expression of the divine, and that the church, in fact, should be about being a kind of social pioneer, leading society in overcoming its transgressions. And in that particular time had to do with the oppression of minorities in the United States, particularly African Americans, and the Vietnam War, which I now call the American War. Our involvement in Southeast Asia and the horrible things that we were doing, I became a pacifist and a resistor to the war. And I think that helped form my understanding of the church, the role of Christianity. And so I became more interested and was part of a movement of progressive radical Christians in the United States and other parts of the world. And I think we saw that the church could be a really positive force in bringing change and bringing justice. So that's always been a main part of my background. I decided to enter the ministry with the hopes that not so much that I would be a pastor in a church, but that I would be leading in some kinds of movements for change and within a global context. So I found myself early on going to Southeast Asia after completing my studies, marrying my wife. The two of us were dedicated to working with village movements, poor people in Southeast Asia. And that's how I got into a lot of the ministry that later unfolded in my life. And after 10 years overseas, then I returned to the United States, and we began pastoring local churches in the United Methodist denomination here in the California, Nevada area of the country. I served churches that were beginning very small, and then as time went, I was appointed to larger congregations, and then finally I served almost 20 years here in Carson City, Nevada. So it's our capital, and it's the oldest church in the state of any denomination, founded just in the time of the gold rush. It was also the largest congregation of Methodists in this state. So I had 20 good years serving those folk. I am now retired I'm still clergy until I die, but I am retired from the local pastorate, and I'm no longer serving a congregation.
Would it be possible to talk a little bit about your work in Brussels and London?
We were first appointed, I need to go back and say we were first appointed to work as in doing village development projects on the island of Borneo in East Malaysia, and then in Sumatra in Indonesia. And those were really pioneering and exciting projects, and we were able to do very innovative things. I think we started probably one of the first microloan systems in the world, as far as I know. After spending 5 years in the village, then I felt that it was time to bring some of what we'd learned to the institutions that were funding and supporting international development around the world. And so while in Brussels, I was active in supporting projects in Africa particularly, and visited and was a part of some of those projects down there. And the fundraising and international government support, particularly in Northern Europe, I was instrumental in trying to raise money and to do grants. And also with the Catholic Church, there are many very wealthy religious orders, religious communities in Europe. They often don't know what to do with all the money they have, and so I spent a good deal of time contacting and raising funds and getting partnerships with some of the religious, particularly Catholic orders. While in London, I helped create a organization called Village Volunteers, which was a way for Northern Europeans to support indigenous people in Africa who were involved in doing community and village development work, but who often didn't have enough resources to fund their own work and their projects. So I would link people up directly between people in Northern Europe, directly with an individual that was doing work in Africa who was an indigenous person. And because I think indigenous people can, over time, do the best work in their own communities. And they just needed the support. So I formed this organization. And it was nice because the Guardian newspaper, they were honoring the most innovative practices that were going on in British society. And we received the award for being the most innovative international development program. So I was very pleased about that. That was largely what I was doing in Europe.
A lot of your art is based on your experiences in these places, and your collaborator, the indigenous, the local population, are present in your art. How did you decide to work with watercolor when presenting these these people and these landscapes?
That's a good question, and it's really serendipitous just by chance, I would say. I don't have any formal artistic training. I've never taken a class or gone to school. Of course, I visited countless museums and I know a lot about art, I suppose you might say. I went back to Indonesia after 35 years of being away. And I was in the island of Bali staying with some friends, and I was just struck again by how artistic the culture is. And being a Hindu culture there in Bali, they had really embodied so many different art forms into their religious expression. And I was so impressed. I mean, just virtually everybody seems to be an artist in some form, whether it's in the dance or in carving or painting or in other forms of drama. I decided I needed to come back again soon, and so I was there in July, and then I returned again in January. And on the way, we stopped in Shanghai, China, and we were just walking down the street, and I noticed there was an art store. And so I went in, I don't even really know why. I went in and I saw paper and watercolor paint and a Chinese brush, which I still use, and I have right here in my working space. So I bought these things, and then spent the next month in Bali in the morning, sitting outside at a table and just painting. I had really no idea about really the subject matter, or I had no style particularly. I had no experience. I just started to mix the paint and to put it on paper. And that's how it happened. So I can't exactly say it was an intentional thing, but it did happen. And so I have been painting since, and I've been going back particularly to Indonesia and to my friend's villa in Bali, and I set up my little outdoor studio and I paint. And initially I painted quite a bit of Balinese dance because it's so striking and unusual and beautiful. And then from there went into painting other subjects. And it's taken by the Hindu sacred stories. I wanted to put some of those into watercolor form. And I observed some local indigenous styles of art and tried to incorporate that into my painting. Some of those paintings that I've made of Vishnu, by the way, mostly they're manifestations of Vishnu, who's part of the trinity of Hinduism, the three gods that are the major forces of Hinduism. Vishnu is so exciting because he is the sustainer and the one who brings salvation to the world. He is the protector. He is the one who creates balance again in the universe when things have gotten out of balance. So I have taken upon myself to paint as much as I can the stories of Vishnu and his incarnations.
Before you start painting in watercolor, do you do sketches? Do you go on site, take pictures? Do you do it over there? How does it work?
Sometimes I'm just observing and painting. I'm not an outdoor painter. I do not do the plein air style painting. I guess I just don't really want to sit out in the hot sun, particularly in the tropics, and paint what I see. I prefer to take photographs or try to remember what I see and take it from there. So sometimes I will take a series of photos, let's say, of rice fields, and then I'll bring them back and incorporate them into a single painting. Sometimes I take videos of Balinese dance or other religious rituals, and then I'll bring it back and try to capture what I think is going on in those. And I try to put as much motion and energy into the painting as I can.
As Christian, you embraced and included their stories, their gods, their beliefs in your art.
Yeah, that would be, from my point of view, necessary, because I don't believe in proselytizing my faith to other people. They can witness my life, my example, and if that inspires them, fine. But I believe that most people already have a religious expression, and it is faithful to their culture, their place, their time, and I learn a lot from them in witnessing their lives. And I think that that's really important, that we be able to understand that every person does have some kind of expression of the holy and the divine in them, and I want to see it and capture it. I don't necessarily want to change it. I suppose the one thing that I hope for in the future with my painting, and it's a little bit of a challenge, I've lived with Muslim people for 5 years in village situations, and I have practiced my faith in their faith. I have fasted, I have worshiped with them, I understand, I think, something of Islam and appreciate it. But in Islam, there is not a tradition of visual art that captures the human form or animal form within any of their sacred art. It's all primarily geometric and nature-based. I haven't yet figured out how to incorporate that into my painting. Although I just went to Spain this last month, and while I was there, I wanted to visit some of those ancient Islamic sites in southern Spain, and Granada and Cordoba and Seville. And I think I'm beginning to get some sense of the beauty, the absolute wonder and beauty and holiness of some of the Islamic art. But that's for the future.
Yes, I believe in Cordoba they have that huge mosque, and also in Granada they have the Alhambra.
Exactly. Those places are awesome.
I was hoping to talk a little bit about your work with disadvantaged communities, and what's it like to work with issues of poverty?
Sure. I guess my basic principle is that everybody has poverty to a certain extent. And just, we have different forms of poverty. Some people it's more material, and for others it's maybe more spiritual. Or maybe it's in terms of relationships, friendships. There's people that are rich and there are people poor in all of those aspects. And I don't look at people who are materially poor as being somehow more disadvantaged, or I don't look at them as people that I need to instruct and teach. In fact, I want to learn from them. I believe that the poor, disadvantaged people who are physically poor, materially poor, I believe that they really have the solutions within their grasp of being able to deal with the poverty that they face. And it may be a great struggle, and it's not going to be easy. But I don't see, those who have instructing those who have not in what they should do. The strategies and tactics that they need to implement, they need to come to themselves. The best I can do is maybe have conversations with them, brainstorm with them how they might do that, and encourage and support them as they undertake it. And then sometimes, get shoulder to shoulder with them in doing something. But largely, I believe that the poor of the earth have to and will deal with their poverty out of their own best wisdom. That's my basic principle. Now, I believe also that we who have things materially or have certain gifts might be considered middle class, or I believe that we can overcome the class barriers that exist between us and the materially poor. And I think we can learn a lot in the process. Our own lives can be better and improved just by being in relationship. In our societies, particularly here in America, we're very segregated in terms of class and race and culture. I think the biggest challenge for us as Americans is to figure out how we can build bridges. And so that's what I'm interested in. I'd like to see people that do have certain resources to be able to build friendships and relationships with those who don't. I think most Americans don't even have a clue as to what's really happening with most poor people, physically poor people in our society, because they don't know any. They only have stereotypes or images that are misinformed. And I think it's really important that we start to establish relationships across the class and race divides. And I think we'll discover in the process that we're all in need of healing, and we're all in need of some graciousness in our lives. That's my point of view and principle. That's how I've organized. That's the kind of organizations that I've helped to found and create are on that basis.
Would this apply to your current work with the organization that you're with right now?
Absolutely. That's what we do. Of course, we're stymied a little bit by the COVID situation. It's hard to have community meetings or bring people together in this time, and hopefully we'll get through it. And I'm seeing that, of course, I think COVID has been a big deal for everybody just across the world. And I know that many of my friends, for instance, in Southeast Asia, really, really suffering because of the, that there's not the means for them to really almost survive. And I've taken it upon myself to try to help individuals. I mean, I just, I say, what do you need right now? Can I help you? And I just send them something. So, yeah, what I'm doing here in the United States is to try to build those bridges and relationships, friendships. I think friendships can go a long way towards overcoming some of the basic issues we have in our society.
There is a tendency towards secularization in these multicultural societies, mostly to avoid any clashes of beliefs in the classroom, in the workplace. And while some people welcome this secularization, others feel oppressed by it. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think everybody can express their faith in a way that is, authentic to them. And as a pastor, I have had to distance myself from the common expression of Christianity, which is so prevalent here in the United States. And sometimes I'm embarrassed to tell people I'm a pastor because immediately they think of, some television evangelist who's milking people for their resources and taking advantage of them. And of course, that is not what I'm interested in or want to associate with. And in America too, we're the most practicing country in the world, I believe, at least within Christianity. Unfortunately, the practice of the faith, it doesn't really materialize. I mean, it never really is realized. It's not authentic. It's just having a belief is a kind of ticket to heaven. And I see a lot of the religion in the United States as an expression of a kind of authoritarian form of faith. And I want to free people from that. I would much prefer to see people have authentic spiritual encounters with the divine mystery of life, and then formulate some understandings out of their historical tradition, if they're Protestant or Catholic or Jewish or Muslim or whatever. So I'm not really bothered by the secularization. I think that is only a way for us to really, maybe it's a way to get distance from the popularized, superficial practice of faith, which I see so prevalent. I mean, there's something wrong with the Christian faith if it is the most segregated hour on Sunday morning of the whole week. So we have some work to do to reform and reestablish more authentic faith.
You show a lot of international experiences in your art. Do you have American realities in your art as well?
I haven't really tackled it very much. I live in Nevada, and most of the art that I see here is wild horses, old barns, mountains. And I guess I am trying to resist some of that. That was from the Anza Borrego Desert, which was one of our biggest and driest deserts in the United States. And those lambs, I was just taking a hike in the desert, and I look up on this cliff and I can see these lambs with their mothers. And so these are bighorn sheep, very wild, and they're trying to manage their ways down this very steep cliff, and they're very careful. So they're young, they're only less than a month old, and they're learning how to traverse the kind of environment they're in, but they're just, very, very intentional and careful not to take the wrong step. But when they get down to the wash where I'm standing and it's level, then they just release in this incredible joy. And they're frolicking and jumping and dancing. So I tried to capture that. And so that's one piece. Then I think there's a couple of deer and its mother that were up on a mountain where I was climbing. It was a climb that I would take every day, and I saw them up there hiding behind rocks, and I tried to capture that. And there's a couple those paintings of the sunflowers and the hollyhock are painted from my backyard, looking out into the pasture that unfolds behind my house and the Sierra Nevada mountains behind. I'm trying to find, well, what's the content that, what do I want to capture? I wish I was a bit more creative and had the ability to create the abstract form of art. And as much as I appreciate it, it is not part of my style. I don't know that I have really a style yet, but I'm not an abstract artist. I think in some ways, well, I want to backtrack just a second. I mean, I think that art, good art, is always an expression of the times that people live in, and should be an expression of the struggles and the victories, the ups and the downs of life in any particular era. We, of course, are witnessing tremendous division and a lot of separation, especially with COVID now. But politically speaking and culturally, we're very divided. And as I mentioned before, we're very segregated when it comes to race or class, education level, and so on. And this is only added to the real separation that people have. And I don't quite know how yet to capture that in the art form, but I think it is very necessary. And I want to do that. Of course, I have a few uh, scenes of bighorn sheep and and deer and so on. But I haven't really quite understood how to do that yet, and I want to.
What are you working on right now?
I'm working on portraits. I find the human face to be very interesting and complex, fascinating, beautiful. And I want to be able to figure it out. It's not easy to paint portraits. And so I want to go ahead and just try them and just keep doing it. And in art, I don't think there's good and bad. Art is not some kind of, place for morality. It just is. It's an expression of life and existence and universe, the divine. So, I would like to just be able to express a lot of that through the human face, and so I'm trying it out on portraits, and in watercolor too. It's difficult because you have to definitely create a layering effect in order to get skin tones that are interesting and somewhat realistic. I don't want to paint exactly what I see, but I'm interested in painting the portrait as it feels, as it expresses the inner spirit of that person. So that's my challenge. I'm working on that.
How did the art community, how did they welcome you when you started to show your art?
I think I kind of perplex people because, again, the typical art that is produced in the West, the western part of the United States, it is focused on very specific kinds of content. And I just don't paint any of that. And so here I am, I'm coming in with a painting of a wicked king who is struggling against a beautiful reincarnation of Vishnu. And it's painted in such a way as that, they've never seen that kind of, that sort of visual before. They don't know what to do with it. And I don't feel in any way rejected. I think people will say, well, that's interesting. I'm not sure they see what I hope to be able to do, which is to bring the world to people, to bring an understanding that we're all part of a human family, and to get beyond the parochialisms that we have, the sort of narrow view of the world. It's only seen from a very specific place and context. I want to bring people out of that and let them experience something that's of the world. And so I'm still willing to do that, but I think it does perplex people.
Western cultures are very much maligned for being insensitive or not understanding the other cultures. However, you as a traveler, have you seen the efforts of those cultures to understand the Westerners?
Well, they can't help it. They are bombarded by Western culture in just about every kind of form. And economic development is almost always in terms of Western models. And so they can't escape it. I think what's important for indigenous people in other parts of the world is to preserve their own cultural expressions, especially artistic expressions. And these can't be lost. And we as humanity we would suffer. We would be impoverished if we did not have those kinds of multicultural expressions. And I think in Bali, for instance, I mentioned just how artistic that culture is. And it has a lot to do with the Hindu religion, which they still practice on a daily basis. But I also find it interesting that there have been many European artists that have been really taken by Bali and have just, they don't go back to Europe. They stay there and they have painted and they have tried to incorporate also some of the local indigenous styles in some of their art, which is great. And so I suppose I'm in that same category. I'm not near as famous or as good as any of them. But I am very happy to be a part of that, I guess, that tradition. But again, I think it's important that the indigenous people that are bombarded by the West, that they be able to maintain and keep some of the preciousness of their own culture.
There are also these stereotypes of what people in the West are. A lot of the people who get here in the West, at least at the beginning, they have very stereotyped images of how these people are and how they should even treat the people here. For example, if you're a woman from the West, then you're probably, more promiscuous, or you're more willing to have drinks with a man, or while at the same time they say that in their culture a woman would never do that. However, that's not true. Not every Western woman runs to the bar and goes out with the first man in the street.
Sure, of course. And I think everybody struggles with their stereotypes. So it goes every direction, that's for sure. And I remember being in a village, a very, very remote village, very impoverished, on the island of Borneo in 1977. And they had one very small television that was run by a car battery. And as long as the car battery was still working, they would gather in the evenings, maybe 50, 60 people, and they would watch Dallas. They would watch Combat, which is these are all old American television programs. And that's what they thought Americans were. So we have exported our culture, and we've exported certain stereotypes of our culture, which of course other people have taken in, and that's what they think. And until proven otherwise, I guess that's what that's the kind of impression or stereotype they will have. And I hope that they will get over those. Because as an American, I don't really want people to think of me as a character out of Dallas.
How can we see divinity in your art?
Oh, that's a good question. You can't exactly see divinity. That's been part of the Christian Judeo history that we have, that there's a mystery that is not exactly visible. So, on the other hand, there is a spiritual character quality of life, and I suppose within every aspect of life, the divine is present. And it's one of the things that I've liked about the Hindu form expression of their sacred story. It's always seems to be about balance, creating balance between evil and good, but not eliminating the evil. The evil is always present. If you go to a typical Hindu temple, for instance, in Indonesia, you will see part of the characters that are dramatized. So their costumes will be there, and it's the ugliest, most evil presence is there, along with the most good, the most beautiful. So I think that that's part of what I try to do in my art, is to allow the divine presence to somehow shine through. I don't know that I'm very successful at that. And it would, of course, be in the eye of the beholder to be able to, it's a subjective experience that one has in an encounter with a piece of art. So I cannot predict how that will be. I would hope, like I say, that people would get a sense that we are a global planetary body that needs each other. And so I suppose that's very spiritual.
There's a trend right now in some countries, I've seen them in Canada at least, of multi-faith churches. So one church would have people from every faith, and that's the church. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a beautiful vision. I'd like to see that. And I personally, like I said, when I lived among Muslims, I would join them in their fasting month, and I would fast and I would worship with them. But I did that not as a Muslim, but as a Christian. And not just as a Christian, but as a Christian leader, as a Christian pastor, ordained and so forth. I feel that that is a wonderful thing that we need to be able to see in different faiths and come together. And if we can figure out a common form where we can worship together, that more power to us. I hope that that would grow. I mean, we are a global people. And so much of our faith, of course, is developed in particular places and contexts. And so we've been limited by that in certain ways. And I think if we can break out of that and witness other people's expression of faith, hear their stories, see their joys, and see their encounter with the divine and experience it ourselves together. How beautiful is that?
We are getting closer to the holidays, Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa. Do you have a message for people all over the world who are celebrating the holidays, not just these three, but in general?
Well, we've gone through a very difficult year. And I think we're all very familiar with something that we would call the darkness. This time of year it's darker every day, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. And you're really experiencing the darkness. And I think that these religious expressions, you mentioned Hanukkah, Christmas, they are particularly the festivals of the light that has the capacity to shine through the darkness. And in so doing, transform our lives. So I would hope that, especially this year, given the fact that it has been tough, the COVID situation around the world has impoverished everybody. And we have all been isolated and cut off. Many of us have been experiencing more depression than we ever have. And so to have light, to be able to shine into our darkness, and to imagine that we're being transformed by that very light. The light of the Hanukkah candles, that even in the face of great evil, that they shone through and could not be put out. Or the light of the Christ child that comes into our broken world and somehow is reconnecting us and giving us grace. It's beautiful. And I think we just need to hold on to that during the season, celebrate it. And then within the Hindu context, of course, too, the shining of the light that Hindus had not too long ago. A reminder of how Vishnu does. There is a sustaining power in the universe that protects us and brings us back. There's one painting that comes to mind though, and it's a painting of, it's called the Monasti, which is a time when the whole village goes down to the beach and they bring all their sacred art, all their sacred figures from the temple. They bring it down to the beach and everybody has a kind of, well, we would call it Christianity. They're rebaptized. And there is a purification using the seawater. And I have the community walking down to the beach. And those umbrellas that are there are protecting the sacred objects that they're carrying as they go down. There's also 3 pieces that are from Angkor Wat, which is in Cambodia. And I took bas reliefs. I painted from bas reliefs some of those sacred stories, Hindu stories. I don't have anything specifically from India. They just, of course, share the Hindu story. And even the Indonesia is 90+% Muslim, and it is the largest Muslim country in the world, population-wise. But almost all the Muslims that live there are also influenced by the early cultural presence of Hinduism. Almost everybody knows the Ramayana stories in Indonesia, even if they're Muslim. And many of them can dance the Ramayana dance or perform Ramayana. So it's very prevalent. And that would, of course, come from India. But many, many centuries ago. Even though I've been painting just, 5 years, all of my work in doing Christian worship was always an artistic expression. Down to, the sacred objects on the altar, the Christian seasons and the way they're expressed through banners and other physical art in the sanctuary, and the music that's played and sung, and the sermon that's crafted. They are all artistic endeavors. And at least they should be, I think. That's what makes worship come alive. And it's that's where the beauty is experienced in the worship. So it just came to my mind that I haven't really been doing the painting very long, but I have been doing Christian worship for a long time. So